Today we're going to do a type and screen on our patient specimen. So I've received this EDTA tube in the lab, and in addition, of course, the requisition that goes along with it. So I've already done a careful clerical check to ensure that this patient specimen exactly matches the requisition, and a few more checks to make sure that I feel that the specimen was collected in the proper manner. So you can refer to your notes on doing a clerical check. I've got my test tube set up. So what I've got is a tube in which my 5% suspension of my patient cells will be made, and it's labeled with the first name, last name, PHN, the accession number, and 5%. So I've got that filled. Actually, I don't. I'll fill that about 1/3 full with saline. Okay. In addition, I've got the test tubes for my testing. So I've got tubes labeled the accession number, anti-A, anti-B, anti-D, A1 cells, B cells, and then I've got 3 test tubes here for the antibody screen. So that's my test tubes. I've got them all ready, and I'm ready to begin my type and screen. Before I start, I'm going to do a really careful check to make sure that this 5% tube is beside the correct patient, especially if I'm running more than one patient at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do is carefully remove the lid of the tube, and I'm going to use a pipette to dip down and pipette off first my plasma into the appropriate tubes. So plasma goes into the reverse grouping tubes and the screening tubes. So I just go down to the plasma level and pull up some plasma. Now my plasma appears a little bit hemolyzed, and it's because I'm using an older sample today, but hopefully you'll have a nicer, more fresh sample. So I'm putting 2 drops of plasma in each tube. Notice that I'm holding my pipette tip vertically, and that the pipette tip is above the opening of the tube. It's not within it, and it's not touching it. Nice drops are formed that way. So 2 drops into each of the ABO reverse grouping and the screening cell tubes as well. With this same pipette, I can go back into my patient sample, go down to the bottom and grab a few cells, and then just put the cells into the tube that have a little bit of saline in it. And you'll notice that I'm kind of squeezing my bulb to get all the cells out of my pipette and into that saline solution. My pipette is going into the biohazard. So I'm going to get this 5% washing. So I'm going to forcefully add some saline, so it's closer to the top, and get this into my centrifuge. And washing cycles are typically 45 seconds for a wash. So I'm just filling a balance tube, putting it on the opposite side, and setting my centrifuge for 45 seconds. In the meantime, what I can do is get started on my screen. Why not get it incubating? And it's just a more efficient way to use your time. So we've got plasma in my screening cell tubes, and I can see that the plasma is there, so that's important. And I'm going to add my screening cells. So my screening cells come in a bottle, and you must ensure that they're well mixed so that any cells that have settled out on the bottom are mixed into the screening cells. So I pick up 1 drop, and again, using good pipetting technique, I'm going to just drop the 1 drop of cells into each of my screening cell tubes. So use good technique for pipetting, use good mixing, read the bottle. I read it when I picked it up, screening cell 2. I'm reading it now when I place the drop into the test tube, screening cell 2, and when I put it back away, I read it a 3rd time, screening cell 2. Same with the screening cell 3, screening cell 3. And the last thing I need to do with the screen before I put it in my incubator is add my enhancement agent. We're going to use PEG, and the instructions call for 2 drops of PEG in each tube. So good pipetting technique, and the PEG added to each tube. So I'm going to take these 3 tubes and give them a little shake and put them in my incubator and set my timer for 15 minutes. In the meantime, I can get to work on my ABO and RH type. I'm not going to show you guys the process and washing and making up a 5% suspension because we've done that previously, but that's after 1 wash. And I'll just show you that I'm just going to gently dump out this saline. And let's pretend this is our third wash, or however many washes your instructions say to do. So I just mix it up and I add some saline to it so that it looks like 5%. So I've got my 5%. Remember, every time you return a tube to a rack that you've taken it out of, do a double check. Make sure that this 5% suspension has been placed beside the appropriate test tube. So check patient first name, last name, PHN, accession number, and ensure you've got it right. Next, what we're going to do is add our anti-sera to our forward grouping. So I've got my anti-A, 1 drop, is going into my forward grouping tube, anti-B, and anti-D. Let's do a quick level check. In every tube we should see liquid. The anti-D tube, I realize, is a little bit tough to see, so pick it up, take a look, make sure you see liquid in it. If there's no liquid in these tubes, you will not have a source of antibody, and it's pretty hard to get a reaction without a source of antibody. So this is called a level check. So now I can go ahead and put the patient's cells into the forward grouping. So the forward grouping contains anti-A, anti-B, anti-D, and if A, B, and D antigens are present on the patient's cells, they will react. So into my 5% suspension, and add 1 drop of my 5% suspension for my patient into each of the forward grouping. Notice that I'll take this pipette and throw it out as opposed to returning it to the 5%, just in case I make a mistake and don't put this back in the right spot. In the reverse grouping, I need my A and B cells. So I mix, read, mix again if you need to, and pipette out 1 drop of A cells into the reverse group and 1 drop of B cells into the B tube. Okay, those are ready to be centrifuged, so I just give them a little waggle, a little shake as I take them into the centrifuge, and we'll get those spun. And this is an agglutination spin, so we spin this for 15 seconds. So it's nice to get the screen cells started first, because you do have 15 minutes, and now I'm sitting at just under 12 minutes. So you have plenty of time to get your ABO and RHs done, maybe recheck your paperwork. If you've got a bit of time, you can make sure you've got your reagents nicely stocked, and be ready to start washing your antibody screen when the bell rings. So let's get this ABO read and recorded. And you've done quite a few ABO RH types now. So good waggle technique, which is more like a tremor. The button is facing towards me, so I can see it. And I do a quick read using the agglutination viewer. And I write down my results. So with anti-A, I've got negative, anti-B negative, anti-D, I've got 4+. With my A1 cells, I've got a 4+, and with my B cells, I have a 4+. So I'm going to interpret this right now as O pause and sign it off. I'm placing these test tubes back in the rack beside my patient. So a careful check to ensure I've got them beside the right patient, and they will remain there until I'm finished the work on this patient, and then I'm going to do a double check to make sure I got it right. So let's pretend that our screen has finished incubating. So I'm going to take my tubes out, and I'm going to forcefully add saline. I'm going to begin my 3 washes. So nice forceful addition. The hope is that all these cells down here will get distributed all the way up the tube so that all cells are washed. So nice forceful addition of saline to each tube. Not too bad. and in for 45 seconds for the wash cycle. In order to save time, I've got some tubes that I've spun down already. So I want to show you what they look like and the next step, which will be dumping out the saline. So there's my tubes. You can see the cell button on the bottom. And they've been centrifuged so the liquid above the saline is nice and clear. And I'm going to dump. So I'm going to dump one tube at a time to start because I'm new at this. So we're going to do a forceful dump. So not a very gentle dump like we did to make a 5%, but forceful. So the tube is going to end up right upside down. So down, you can see some liquid here. I want to get rid of that. So up gently, down, and back up. I'll do that with 2 tubes now. Okay, so I've got the tops of my tubes separated so that I don't contaminate from one to the other. Forceful dump. Bring the tubes up slowly, dump to get that little bit out, and there's lots of cells left. So not to worry that you're going to lose your cells. Before we wash them the second time, you're going to shake them up because it's really difficult to wash cells properly if they're all in a ball at the bottom of your test tube. Okay? So I'm going to forcefully add saline again. Notice that the tip of my saline bottle is not touching the test tubes because I don't want to contaminate from one tube to the next. So in those go, 45 seconds. And I'll just pull out my other ones. And there's my tubes. You can see that the button is off to one side a little bit. It's not directly on the bottom. And that's simply because the head of my centrifuge has an angle to it. So the cells end up on one side. In order to preserve cells and not have them fall out of your tube, it often is thought that if you put the cell button against the palm of your hand, so the button is closer to the palm of my hand, the cells will be retained better. So I'm going to dump all 3 tubes at once. I would recommend 1 tube at a time until you get good at this. But notice again that I'm leaving the tops of the tubes separated so that liquid cannot pass from one to the other. So the motion is always the same. It's a hard dump for washes before we use anti-human globulin. So a nice hard dump. You can see there's still liquid there. I come up slowly because I don't want to slosh the liquid up into my tube. So I come up slowly and then a forceful down. And when I come back up, I've got a nice dry cell button. Very little liquid left in my tubes. So I shake those up and again forcefully add saline. And put them into wash for 45 seconds. So we're going to pretend this is our last wash. So I've got my tubes, I'm putting the button against my hand. I'm making sure that the tops of the tubes are separated. I'm going to dump, and often on a last wash, people will blot the tubes to make sure that they've gotten every last bit of saline out of there. So I've got my Kleenex ready, and I'm ready to dump and then blot. Okay, so nice forceful dump. There's liquid there. Shake it out. I sometimes do 2. A quick blot and back up. I still got lots of cells in my tubes. Okay. The next step in your procedure says to add the anti-human globulin. So we use anti-IgG monospecific here at SAIT. And the SOP calls for 2 drops of anti-human globulin into each screening cell tube. The anti-human globulin will bridge the gap between sensitized cells if they exist in these tubes. So this is an agglutination spin. So we're going to spin for 15 seconds, and then we'll be ready to read our antibody screen. So I've got my agglutination mirror ready, because when I look at agglutination reactions, I like to use this concave mirror, which magnifies the contents of the tube, and there's a really nice light source coming down, which allows us to really visualize the reactions well. So depending on how experienced you are, you may waggle one tube at a time. So I take a look at my tube. I don't see hemolysis in the liquid portion of the tube. That's the first check that I do. I put the button up. So the button is facing my face. Okay, so the button's up here, and I'm going to waggle. Starts out as kind of a back and forth motion like this to try to dislodge the button, and then it becomes more of a shake. So the cells are off the bottom of the tube, so I bring the tube into kind of a horizontal position where the liquid is distributed along the length of the tube a little bit, and then I look under my agglutination mirror, and what I'm looking at in the agglutination mirror is the image in the mirror, as opposed to looking at the tube itself. So I'm looking at the image in the mirror, and I don't see any reaction there. I'm going to waggle my other two tubes at the same time. So I place the button up, and I begin the waggling process. What I'm doing is just having the liquid run across the button in an attempt to help it get off the bottom of the tube. So the liquid is scraping the cells off the tube. Neither of these were hemolyzed when I first picked them up. So I've got the button off the bottom of the tube. So what I'm going to do is just tilt the tube so that the liquid is floating along the bottom of the tubes, and then hold them over my agglutination mirror, and I'm looking at the image in the mirror. And I don't see any agglutination, so I'm going to write that down on my requisition, that in PEG at IAT, I didn't see any reactions. The last check in the procedure is to add check cells. So anytime we use anti-human globulin, we always add check cells to ensure that the anti-human globulin was indeed added and remained reactive. So again, it's been added to all negative tubes. Give a little shake into the centrifuge for a 15-second spin, and we'll read our check cells. While I'm waiting for that, at this point in time, I'm going to do a last check of my tubes that are in my rack here. So I'm going to ensure that my patient specimen matches the 5% that I had beside it. I'm going to make sure the accession number on all these tubes is matching my EDTA tube on my patient. And I'm going to re-look at these results. So I'm pulling them out, and I'm looking at them again and saying to myself, oh my gosh, yep, that looks like negative with the anti-A, negative with the anti-B, 4+ with the anti-D, 4+ with the A1 and with the B cells. Yep, that's an O person, and I've interpreted it as O pos. Once I've done that, I'm able to throw these out, but please do not throw these out until you've done that last check, okay? So my screening cell tubes with the check cells are ready. So I pull those out again, placing the button up. It's facing towards me, and I waggle. So I'm just using the liquid to peel off the check cells, and check cells should give, I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but check cells should give a nice positive result. I'll hold them over the mirror. They're not really necessary because they're very strong, but you might be able to see that, okay? So my check cells are nice and strong, so I record those reactions. Mine were about 3+ mixed fields, so I've recorded that. and then I interpret my antibody screen. So my patient's plasma did not react with screening cells 1, 2, or 3, so my antibody screen will be interpreted as negative. And the last step, of course, is to initial or sign your work, depending on your lab's protocol. Take a look at your requisition, make sure everything's filled out, make sure that the outdates, time and date are in there, and I believe we're done.